So, at one level, an enormous personal victory for Prince Harry over News Group newspapers. Rupert Murdoch's news organisation is paying him a hefty, perhaps ginormous chunk of money, and issued a frankly grovelling and lengthy apology for the way it obtained information about him. I'm talking about surveillance, phone hacking, and the misuse of private information. The publishers made, in their words, a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the serious intrusion by the Sun between 1996 and 2011 into his private life, including incidents of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators working for the Sun. We acknowledge, they went on, and apologise for the distress caused to the Duke and the damage inflicted on relationships, friendships and family, and have agreed to pay him substantial damages. It's probably between 10 and 20 million pounds, and that is the short version of the apology. So why do I say it was a victory for Harry at one level? Answer, because by settling, the publishers don't have to have their day in court with revelations tumbling out about exactly what they were up to, which must have been quite something. Let's talk first to Tina Brown, both a royal biographer and writer about Harry, but whose late husband, Harry Evans, was a famous editor who fell out with Mr. Murdoch back in the day. She told me what she thought contributed to Prince Harry changing his mind after being so committed to making sure he faced those tabloids in open court.
Simply the British legal system, which I think is frankly pretty tonto, which is that even if you win, if the compensation offered to you is less than the original deal that was offered, then you have to pay it out, and that's why Hugh Grant in the end, he just couldn't be on the hook for that amount of money. So I think that even Harry at some point had to settle. But look, he took them right to the courtroom door. I truly admire Harry for making this stand. I mean, he really did. I mean, he's put himself through hell. He's put everybody in the family through hell in a way. But on behalf of something righteous, frankly, which is that he was trying to sort of reclaim his childhood. He was trying to reclaim the peace of mind of his mother that was kind of, sabotaged for so long with all these intrusions. So I think we really have to admire, frankly, his cojones for going through this.
Indeed, because he's spoken before about, I don't think he used the word, but the sort of almost sense of paranoia when he was growing up about who was it around him who was leaking all this stuff, who is actually a friend, who's not a friend, who's just recording, who's observing. It must have been a terrible, terrible way of becoming an adolescent.
It was horrible for him, and he was hounded. All of his girlfriends were persecuted and hounded. He never knew which was his friend and which wasn't, as you say. And it was a cruel and agonizing thing he was put through. So he had a lot of anger about that. But, honestly, I think at the Buckingham Palace they should be giving him a champagne reception, because the fact is that they all hate the press and they've all been tortured, each one, really, by the tabloids. Look at how Camilla was utterly tortured, for all of those early years. So they ought to actually be sort of breaking out the champagne and saying, well, Harry, you did it for all of us, but I'm sure they won't be.
I'm sure they won't be as well. Do you think actually the world has changed since these events? The news of the world went under, of course, and you and I have seen a lot of newspaper apologies over the years, but I don't remember 300 words quite as grovelling, quite as fulsome as this one.
Well, I mean, they didn't have a leg to stand on, actually, in this case. I mean, they really didn't. And Murdoch has had to pay out like over £1 billion, pounds to all of these litigants over the phone hacking. I mean, it has ruined, really the economics of the British companies. So they wanted to settle this, but they also had a lot of motivation to settle this last bit, because Harry was really going for the so-called clean-up effort that was led by, Will Lewis and Rebecca Brooks, etc., after the phone hacking. And, I mean, it was supposed to be the clean-up of the sort of culture of the paper, but actually it was a clean-up on behalf of the Murdoch family to make sure that nothing, really incriminated them. And that is what they really feared. And Will Lewis, of course, who is now the CEO of the Washington Post, has had sleepless nights wondering what the hell was going to come out in this trial that was going to incriminate him, when he's now the CEO of the paper that, the great Washington Post that broke the Watergate story, where he is really a pariah in his own newsroom as this kind of awful shadow of did this man destroy evidence, essentially, has been hanging over him. So for him, it was a giant relief. I think he will be thrilled. And I think just Rupert, and so they couldn't have those emails come out. They saw what happened in the case of the Dominion voting machines versus Fox when they actually had to pay an unbelievable fine, in that instance. I think it was a record-breaking fine of over $700 million, which was incredible thing for having lied constantly on the air, saying that the Dominion voting machines threw the election for Biden. And of course, when all those texts started to come out, it showed that the people who worked at Fox all knew that they were actually going on the air telling a lie. So, he couldn't go through that again, in fact. So there really wasn't any alternative but to what happened, I think.
Media companies survive that kind of thing. I was really interested in what you were saying just a moment ago about the other will, the heir to the throne here, because, of course, the two brothers have been semi-estranged for a while. You said you thought the royal family should open the champagne for Harry after this. Is this the kind of moment perhaps his brother might look at him again and think, do you know what, not all bad?
I don't know. It should be. I think this could be a moment when, if William, I think it'd be a very big thing for William to do, to say, hey, good on you. You did it for us. You did it for our mother. But, William had made his own settlement quietly, which greatly irritated Harry. And I'm not sure how much William really likes this pivot in Harry's image, because I think at the moment, I think you will find, we will all find, or maybe you already know, that the man in the street says, good on you, Harry, for going to do this. And I'm not sure how much William adores Harry getting that kind of press.
And what of Harry himself, Tina? This is a lot of money. He's been worried in the past about, paying for the security around him in Montecito and the kind of life he wants to live. This makes him secure in a way that he hasn't felt, presumably, for a while.
Well, in Montecito, 10 million doesn't get you very far.
I thought you were going to say that. I knew you'd say that.
That is sort of, for 10 million, the only thing you can buy is a tear down. So I think it probably helps with a few of the, gardening bills. Obviously, it would be a very cool thing if he could put it into his foundation to grow that, which is quite honestly a very, very tinily funded foundation. I mean, they haven't raised really anything much for the foundation. But I suspect that their financial circumstances will mean that it has to be kept, to pay off, as you say, the security and all the debts that they might start to accrue soon if all these deals fall through. But yes, it must be a nice feeling to think that you've got, shall we say, a year's worth of bills paid.
I've rarely had a conversation that makes me feel more like the shivering peasant on the wrong side of the palisade looking upwards, Tina, but it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, let's hear now from Jim Waterston, editor of London Centric and former media editor of The Guardian. Jim, great to have you on the show. Surveillance, eavesdropping, hanging around, picking up gossip from close family or friends has gone on since journalism started. Is it still going on today, no matter what happened in court?
Very few places have the resources to do anything like, and I think one of the things that Tina alluded to in that chat that your listeners just heard was that a lot of this was done in an era when tabloids, A, set the national agenda, and B, had the money to do it. The idea that they could spend hundreds of thousands on private investigators nowadays is for the birds. If they're still around, they're just busy paying out court settlements like this. But Rupert Murdoch's company has been the one that is willing to put the money behind it to avoid going to court. And I think that's the telling thing. The Mirror had to fight it and pay out to Harry because it wanted to draw a line under it. Rupert Murdoch's one is the one that was still willing to bid up the cash to avoid the executive's dirty laundry being aired.
I'm really interested in that aspect of it, Jim. Does this suggest that actually the newspaper company is the winner as well, that there was stuff so embarrassing, so detailed, and probably so personal to individual journalists that they simply couldn't have it out in the open?
So I've sat through 6 years of hearings on this in various forms, and this was the one we were all waiting for. This was the one with the one really still powerful media company at the heart of it, Rupert Murdoch's empire, which stretches, this is the Times, Sunday Times, Sun, and things like that. And the thing we were all waiting for was, did Rebekah Brooks, who's now the chief executive, know about anything that may or may not have gone on at her papers. And really, we'll never know the full answer to that. There's an admission of arm's length guilt that some private investigators employed by The Sun. And while the statement put out by Murdoch's company was very apologetic, the actual follow-up briefing has been anything but. It's been emphasising that, yes, some private investigators did some bad things, but none of our journalists did anything wrong. And there was certainly no phone hacking at The Sun. That was all those nasty people at the News of the World, which we shut down. So The Sun, which still is this brand that politicians still pay attention to, can claim to be squeaky clean. Strangely, despite being squeaky clean, that makes it sort of fourth or fifth case where Murdoch's company has paid millions to avoid defending The Sun in court. So every single time, basically, they've paid out to keep The Sun in the clear, to keep Rebecca Brooks away from having to answer any questions, and to make sure that there's no reason for these claims to be challenged. There's no admission on the part of the executives that they did anything wrong.
Jim, you sound to me a little bit like the fisherman who has turned up just as the last big salmon leaves the river. It must be very frustrating indeed. Given the amount of money being paid out, however, what does this say about the economics of The Sun? Because it was once a hugely profitable operation for Murdoch. No longer, I think.
Yeah, and its value on the books has been written down to zero. Its print edition is selling a few 100,000. When these stories, when these phone hacking cases, when the incidents where you delve to get the info on Harry were at its peak, it was selling 4 million. Now it's down to maybe a tenth of that. Sure, it has a relatively big web presence, but it's not making a whole load of money. In fact, it's losing an awful lot depending on how you read the books. And it's just not the powerful force that it was. So in some ways, really what Harry was going for was the accountability of the people who did historic things to him and the fact that they were still in public life. And, it does always just come back to Rebecca Brooks, who still is in charge of Murdoch's UK media empire. She was found not guilty of phone hacking in a criminal trial and, of course, denies any wrongdoing. But, the people who he personally blames are still in public life in the UK, and this was his moment. And even he couldn't quite make the sums add up to force this all the way to a full trial where that would be held.
So all that great sort of crusading and the clamour from organisations like Hacked Off, this is the end of the road for that. It's over now, yeah?
Well, there's not going to be another high-profile case against the News of the World or the Sun or any other part of Murdoch's empire that could go anywhere like this far. This was the last one that could have gone to court in a sort of everything in public. Harry's still got the sort of the final part of his trilogy against the Mail Group to come, and so we'll see what comes out of that. But as much as they've paid out an enormous sum of money, as much as they've had to concede that illegal behaviour was carried out by people working for The Sun, I think the executives at News International will not be deeply unhappy with the fact that this has come out in the way it has today. And that's quite an odd thing to swallow after 5 years of building up to this supposed peak.
Indeed, the end of a long story. The salmon says goodbye. Jim Waterston, thank you very much indeed for talking to me.